His intention was merely to investigate an odd noise in the thicket.
Michael Carter.
Yet moments later, he was cradling a wounded lioness while an entire pack of mature lions gradually encircled him. There were no bellows, no snarls, only gazes piercing, primordial, and unwavering. The events that followed contradicted every law of the wilderness. This is no myth. It is a genuine occurrence recorded on film that left millions dumbfounded. And it all commenced with a single resolution to preserve a life regardless of the price. The dawn at Kagalagati started as it invariably did, silent, expansive, and misleadingly tranquil. It was the sort of quietude that felt substantial rather than vacant, extending across the crimson soil and short grasslands as the sun rose. Michael Carter had understood from years past that such stillness was never without significance. In the bush, silence frequently indicated that something was observing or something was amiss. Aged 41, Michael had dedicated over half his existence to environments like this. He was a former park warden now serving as a lead bush guide for a private ecotourism firm that serviced primarily pensioned voyagers from the United States. Individuals who had passed decades behind desks in insurance agencies, law practices, or financial firms, and now desired to witness something authentic before time ran out. Michael comprehended them. He led them cautiously, dutifully, always stressing security preservation and reverence for nature. That morning he had stationed the transport near a parched riverbed while his small party took pictures of distant antelope. The showers from the previous evening had vanished rapidly, leaving behind moist earth and the subtle scent of damp rock. Michael positioned himself a short way off, surveying the landscape by custom, when the noise reached him. Initially, it barely made an impression, just a sound out of place, a slender fractured whimper that pertained neither to the breeze nor the avian life. It occurred again, fainter now, wafting from a cluster of prickly scrub near the bank. Michael's posture tightened. Decades of practice honed his reflexes faster than conscious reasoning ever could. He strode deliberately toward the disturbance, careful not to startle the group behind him. Every pace felt more burdensome than the previous one. The nearer he approached, the more distinct the sound became. It wasn't the vocalization of a grown predator. It was tinier, higher-pitched, frantic. As he separated the shrubbery, the scene froze him instantly. A young lion, barely a few months of age, was jammed betwixt two stone blocks near the rim of the riverbed. One of its rear limbs was snagged deep in a tight fissure, contorted at an abnormal angle. Its coat was soggy and matted with dirt. Its thorax heaved too rapidly, every respiration shallow and terrified. The cub's eyes fixed upon Michael the instant it spotted him. Throughout his tenure in wildlife preservation, Michael had been instructed in one inviolable law: do not intervene. The wild, however ruthless it seemed, adhered to its own equilibrium. Interference could cause more detriment than benefit. Rangers forfeited their careers and occasionally their lives by neglecting that decree. He realized that somewhere close by the cub's dam would be hunting. Michael scanned the area instinctively, his pulse racing. The exposed savanna provided no shelter, no simple exit. If the pride was nearby, he was already in peril simply by remaining there. Assisting the cub would only exacerbate matters. Every fiber of his training urged him to retreat, to turn back, to allow nature to proceed. However, the creature wailed once more. Now it wasn't merely terror in its tone. It was fatigue, agony, the audio of a life depleting its vigor. Michael sensed an alteration within something more profound than instruction, deeper than rationale. He recalled the people he guided, the benefactors who financed conservation initiatives, the lengthy dialogues regarding ethical duty and the sanctity of life. He had spent years discussing empathy in carefully selected phrases, often during tranquil nights by campfires under insured safari itineraries and opulent travel arrangements. Now empathy stood before him crude and defenseless. He lowered himself slowly, keeping his motions measured and serene. The cub recoiled but did not withdraw. Its diminutive frame shivered violently as Michael inspected the snare. The rock had migrated during the nocturnal rain, trapping the cub effectively. Abandoned there, it would either perish from thirst or attract carnivores long before aid appeared. Michael took off his gloves with trembling fingers. As he extended his hand to the stone, the animal acted unpredictably. It raised its head and intercepted his stare, not with hostility, but with something hauntingly recognizable, reliance, or perhaps the lack of any alternative. In that instant, Michael Carter traversed a boundary he had honored his whole existence. He was unaware of it then, but the quiet of that morning was about to fracture, and what ensued would contest everything science background and survival reflexes had taught him about the wilderness. Michael's hands shook as he grasped the flattened steel rod he carried beneath his belt for clearing minor trails. It wasn't designed for such a task. Yet nothing about this situation was standard. The little lion's respiration arrived in quick spasms, resembling an engine failing to sustain itself. Its gaze, dilated and dimmed by terror, remained fixed on his face. He wedged the metal gingerly betwixt the stone slabs, leveraging it against his knee for support. Each motion needed to be unhurried and silent. A single fracture of the rock could crush the creature's limb or Michael's hand. Perspiration rolled down his back as he exerted force, straining to hear the creak of moving mass. There. The boulder shifted marginally, but sufficiently. The cub cried and attempted to jerk loose, yet its foot remained trapped too deeply. "Steady now," Michael murmured. Not that the beast comprehended him, but he needed to trust that one could. "You must allow me to assist." Another shove, another. The rod slid. His fist collided with the rock, sending agony shooting up his wrist. He clenched his teeth and tried once more. On the second attempt, the gap expanded just enough. The cub, detecting the shift, writhed frantically and tumbled into the dust at Michael's feet. It did not flee. Rather, it stumbled ahead, frail and shivering, and huddled its tiny frame against his shin. Its talons gripped the fabric of his trousers, small yet piercing. Its head leaned on his knee. Michael stood still, not out of fright, but because a gut feeling warned him this was atypical. This wasn't instinct. It was necessity, a bond stark and alarming in its purity. The cub refused to release him. He crouched once more, uncertain of his next move. Hoisting it could inflict further torment, yet abandoning it here was no longer a possibility. Even if the pack returned for it, the leg might be fractured. Without care, the wound would fester. This sector of the sanctuary lacked veterinary support on call like the busier zones. If he failed to act immediately, it might not endure another day. Michael tenderly wrapped his arms around the animal's chest. It recoiled initially, but did not resist. He sensed its ribs under the tangled coat, too distinct, too delicate. He could detect the heart thumping against his forearm, rapid and wild. The cub was lighter than it ought to be. Likely hadn't fed well in days. Then it occurred. A gust arose, scorching and arid, sweeping over the savanna. Michael perceived the alteration at once. His reflexes roared louder than his logic. The airflow had veered, and with it his odor had drifted. He stood abruptly, the little one still in his grasp, sweeping the skyline. The thicket behind him undulated softly in the wind, mute and unconcerned. Nothing moved, yet he knew better than to rely on the silence here. Scent was communication. It was a warning. It was identity. And now the tidings riding that gust were plain: there is a human, and he holds one of ours. He pivoted gradually, guarding the cub with one arm. It had nestled into him now, burying its head beneath his elbow. Every sinew in his frame constricted. His breathing decelerated, not from serenity, but preparation. If the pride was close, they would arrive now. He possessed perhaps 2 minutes, 3 at most, before the matriarch, if she was within reach, caught the signal, perhaps less, if the male was prowling nearby. He lacked time to ascend a tree to conceal himself, or even radio for assistance. His vehicle was nearly 70 yards distant, stationed past a low berm and obscured from view. The visitors would still be gazing at far-off giraffes or adjusting camera lenses. They would never hear his shout, and he couldn't sprint. Not carrying a cub, that would be self-destruction. Michael retreated toward a denser patch of scrub, stepping cautiously and checking every inch of the horizon. His boots crunched on the parched earth too noisily. His respiration sounded like a gale in his own ears. He squatted low and drew the cub nearer, hugging it to his ribs. The creature emitted a soft, rhythmic noise, a blend of a whine and a rumble. A noise that seemed to plead, "Do not forsake me." He made no reply. He couldn't. Yet in that instant, he realized with absolute conviction that regulations no longer governed this. This wasn't about guidelines or procedure. This wasn't about ecotourism morality or documentary norms. This was one sentient being aiding another. It was empathy, simple human empathy, transcending all else. And deep down, Michael wished that if lions could grasp anything about people, perhaps it would be that. A brittle shuffle emerged from the vegetation ahead. Michael snapped his head around, spine-rigid legs braced to dash or battle or attempt something, anything. Nothing was visible yet. But a presence was there. He groped for the small distress flare hooked to his waist, a relic from his ranger years. Not an armament, but a tool that might baffle, divert, or stall. Not much, but his sole option. And beneath it all, a solitary thought looped continuously, loud and demanding. I chose this. Now I endure it. If he survived, he would document it. Perhaps narrate the tale on one of those wildlife conservation forums, where users argue over morals and rules. He might even upload the footage. Maybe on a site where outdoor fans or travel insurance clients scrolling by safari promos might witness it. Not for popularity nor glory, but to admonish that the wild doesn't always obey laws. And occasionally, neither should we. Because there are times when reason yields to intuition. When the dread of litigation or the peril of error fades behind the plain reality, if you can assist, you do. Even while the repercussions remained concealed in the herbage, the atmosphere felt altered, now electrified like the air preceding a summer tempest. Michael huddled low, the cub still squeezed against his chest, both obscured within the arid thicket just past the fractured riverbed. His knuckles turned pale, gripping the flare, not because he intended to use it, but because clutching an object made him feel less helpless. The cub had ceased vocalizing. It didn't appear comatose, merely motionless. Too motionless, as if it also perceived what was approaching. And then he spotted them. Initially, they were merely blurs in the heat shimmer, wavering shapes just past the tree line. But within moments, those shapes resolved into distinct figures. 4 lionesses stepped from the high grass, their forms streamlined and low tails flicking. Behind them, deeper in the mist, a 5th shape plodded into sight. The male larger than any Michael had witnessed in years. Massive, dark-maned, sluggish, yet imperial, he strode as if the earth belonged to him, for it did. They did not bellow. They did not snarl. They had no need to. Their gazes were already fixed upon him. Michael understood precisely what they perceived, a human crouching, respiring too heavily, clutching something that was not his, something that was theirs. This was no longer a matter of domain. This was personal. He desired to flee. Each fiber of his being yelled it, yet he remained motionless. Motion implied aggression, and aggression implied demise. The lionesses halted at the rim of the glade, their amber gazes locked on him like beacons. They created a broad curve, voiceless and signal-free, yet flawlessly coordinated. He had witnessed this arrangement previously from the security of a transport. It was a standard encircling tactic utilized prior to the final strike in a pursuit. Yet he was not a victim, at least not currently. The infant shifted barely in his grasp, and one of the females advanced a pace. Michael's pulse hammered against his chest. He dipped his chin, not in capitulation, but in prudence. If he stared directly into their optics, it could be perceived as a provocation. These were not menagerie beasts. They did not interpret facial cues. They interpreted purpose, motion, odor, stance. He had to render himself diminutive, harmless, insignificant. And still the females did not approach further. For a protracted minute, nothing transpired. The breeze bore the crisp, arid scent of warmth and earth. Insects droned in the quietude. The patriarch stayed rearward near the vegetation, his form partially obscured by an acacia. He was observing, not defending, not relaxing, scrutinizing. Michael had encountered perilous fauna before black rhinos, buffalo, even a close call with a solitary elephant bull during rutting season. But this differed. This wasn't fury or reflex. This was something distinct. The females had ceased movement because they were anticipating what, precisely then, the lead female advanced. She wasn't the most massive yet, Michael could deduce by how the others adjusted around her by the gravity of her glare that she was the leader. Her paws shifted gradually across the soil, every stride measured. She arrived within 20 feet, then 15. Her auricles twitched once her snout elevated. She was interpreting the atmosphere, and then her eyes fell to the package in Michael's embrace. Michael's stir did not respire. His hold on the cub relaxed marginally sufficient for the young lion's head to rise anew. It produced a small, raspy squeak just once. The dam paused. Her stance did not alter. Her stare did not soften, but her tail ceased flicking and her head cocked ever so slightly to the side. Like witnessing an unexpected sight, like identification. Michael's mind raced. Could she discern her own offspring from this range? Was it plausible, or perhaps it wasn't merely vision, maybe it was aroma, or the audio of that frail little peep. Perhaps that was all required to transform everything. And then abruptly, the lioness took another stride ahead, this time to within 10 feet. Michael's sinews tightened automatically. If she lunged, he would lack time to respond. The flare wouldn't rescue him. The thicket wouldn't conceal him. The sole barrier betwixt him and mortality was the slender, fragile weight of a wounded cub. The beast seated herself just like that. Silent, harmless, yet authoritative. It was not obedience. It was presence, a statement. And for the initial time, Michael sensed something peculiar spark within him. Not security, but potential. Matters were shifting. Something about this instance didn't adhere to the standard narratives of hunter and quarry. There was no bellowing, no prowling, no gore. There was only this odd, hushed negotiation occurring in silence. Michael adjusted slightly, allowing the cub to glide down toward the turf, cautious not to spook either of them. The cub whined and leaned against his shin, but did not dash. The female's eyes tracked every gesture, and then Michael spotted it. A second lioness, smaller and more juvenile, stepped forth behind the matriarch. Yet she did not move toward him. Rather, she lowered her head nose to the dirt and inhaled where he had just stood. Her bearing was curious, vigilant, almost deferential. Michael didn't entirely comprehend it yet, but he realized one thing. He was no longer solitary. He wasn't merely a man adrift in the bush with a cub in his grasp. He had been perceived. Not as an adversary, not yet, but as something distinct. His thoughts flashed back briefly to a blog post he'd perused years ago regarding travel coverage for high-risk eco-tours. It had itemized predators, dehydration, even lightning bolts, but it had never calculated for this. No contract could. No stipulation could elucidate how a feral beast might view something human and not discard it. Michael remained static, waiting. So did the pack. And in that dense, throbbing quiet, he realized that something primordial had commenced. Something no lens could ever fully record. He was standing at the very brink of a decision, not his own, but theirs. Michael had never felt more diminished. Kneeling on the fractured soil, encircled by 5 mature lions, he was outnumbered, outclassed, and devoid of alternatives. The cub at his flank had gone silent again, its tiny frame shivering against his limb, eyes dilated, but not in agony, just bewilderment. It knew something was amiss, even if it couldn't grasp what. Directly ahead, the matriarch remained seated, her amber orbs fastened on him. Her visage was inscrutable. No grimace, no blink, just steadfast attention. The others remained in arrangement, spaced just enough to remind him they could bridge the gap in seconds. The male had not stirred, but his aura radiated like warmth, dominant, observing, prepared. Michael's muscles were taut as cable. He dared not inhale too deeply. He knew enough from his tenure as a ranger to identify the strain in a pride when a verdict was being formed. This wasn't hunting. This was arbitration. He wasn't being pursued. He was being evaluated. A solitary error could tilt the balance. A change in pitch, a twitch of a member, even a glance sustained too long. Every lion here possessed the ability to slay him in a heartbeat, and yet none had acted. He was no longer just a human in the wilderness. He was part of something unfolding, something delicate, ancient, and unseen. The cub whimpered softly again, then to Michael's shock, took a trembling pace ahead. Just one paw placed lightly on the earth. Then another. It hobbled clearly, favoring its damaged limb, and approached the matriarch. Michael's hand instinctively rose to halt it, but then froze in midair. Let it go. Whatever ensued wasn't his to govern. The cub reached the lioness and paused. Its snout lifted. The matriarch did not move. For a second, they just gazed at one another. And then with a slow, purposeful motion, the cub rubbed its skull against her torso and collapsed at her feet. Michael exhaled a noise betwixt a gasp and a plea. The matriarch finally blinked. Then she bent low and pressed her nose to the cub's spine gently once. Her tail flicked once, then stilled. It was a validation, but not yet admission. And Michael understood this wasn't solely about the cub. This was about him. She rose to her full stature, massive and regal in the yellow light. Then, in a movement so fluid it barely agitated the air, she paced toward him. Michael's breath caught in his throat. She was merely 8 feet away now. Every instinct he possessed shrieked to retreat, to sever eye contact, to sprint. But he did not budge. He couldn't. If he moved, it signified dread. If he ran, it signified guilt. Instead, he performed the one act he never imagined he would. He dipped his head. Not theatrically, just marginally. Sufficiently. It wasn't a signal from a manual. It wasn't something he'd ever practiced. It stemmed from intuition, from something core within that realized this was no longer a contest of might, but one of presence. He wasn't yielding. He was displaying reverence. The lioness halted again. They stood like that, human and carnivore, frozen in a mutual comprehension neither could define. And then arrived the moment Michael would never forget. The matriarch stepped nearer. Not rapid, not menacing. And then she did something that no guidebook, no wildlife insurance policy, no wilderness safety workshop had ever equipped him for. She tilted forward and pressed her brow against his. It was not a shove, not a caution, not even a trial. It was a signal of identification. Her respiration was warm against his visage, earthy and pungent. Her eyes were near enough that he could view the golden specks around the pupils. For one suspended heartbeat, they looked at each other. Two beings from diverse realms locked in an impossible instant. And then, just as tenderly, she stepped back. Michael barely heard the flare slip from his grip. The other lionesses adjusted slightly, not in irritation, but in alignment, as if a voiceless command had traversed the pride. Whatever was being determined had now been settled. The alpha male ultimately stirred. With a low rumble, he padded forward, not hastily, but with that same grounded dominion as the matriarch. He came to stand beside her, glanced at the cub, then turned his head to Michael. It wasn't a scowl. It was an appraisal. Final. Complete. Then he sat right there in the dust, 10 feet from the man who had transported his cub. It wasn't submission. It was a ruling. You are permitted to remain. Michael knew not whether to weep or crumble. His knees throbbed. His back screamed. His chest felt hollow with the shock of continuing to exist. The cub gave a short, high-pitched mew. It had curled into the gap between the two adult lions now resting at their feet. Michael blinked hard. The sun had shifted. The atmosphere had cooled slightly, and still no one moved to drive him off. No roar, no bluff charge, nothing. It was as if in some mute ceremony that resisted explanation he had been acknowledged, not welcomed, not embraced, but pardoned. And in the sphere of lions, that was everything. He stayed squatting for several additional minutes, uncertain of what was anticipated, doubtful if the episode had genuinely concluded. Yet the pack remained static. Finally, he rose deliberately, cautiously, and took a single pace rearward, then a second. None pursued. He commenced his withdrawal, every stride hesitant, every respiration still trapped in his gullet. However, he did not turn his back. He refused to not on them, not on the lionette. When he reached a secure range, he ultimately gazed toward the skyline. Somewhere out there lay his transport. Somewhere behind him, a narrative had originated that he would dedicate the remainder of his days attempting to comprehend. Michael had traversed halfway back to the embankment before his legs buckled. He sank slowly to the earth thorax, heaving palms quivering, covered in a layer of perspiration and dirt. His heart rate hadn't decelerated since the matriarch's brow touched his. That instant still repeated on a loop in his psyche, dreamlike, hallowed, and wholly inexplicable. He looked back just once to where the pride lingered. They hadn't stirred. The youngster was nestled at the female's flank, now grooming its foot with sluggish, weary motions. The lionesses were reclining at ease yet vigilant, their forms coiled in silent protection. And the male. He kept vigil, his profile distinct against the amber illumination. Michael gazed for a while longer. He felt wrong to depart, yet he knew better than to extend a hospitality he had never merited initially. He navigated back to the truck, gradually prudent with every tread. When the automobile finally appeared stationed just past the knoll, a torrent of clashing sentiments struck him. Alleviation, incredulity, wonder. The passengers within had failed to perceive a thing. They were too fixated on a pair of giraffes in the distance. Janice, one of the elder travelers, a retired educator from Arizona, glanced across and grinned. "There you are. We assumed you had become misplaced." Michael forced a slight smirk. "I discovered something I didn't foresee." He offered no details. Not yet. Inside, his satellite phone vibrated with a missed ring from the reserve's monitoring hub. Likely standard, possibly urgent. But at that moment, Michael couldn't process anything that wasn't the grit on his shoes and the recollection of that beast's respiration on his flesh. Upon returning to base that evening after the guests had retired to their lodgings and the constellations had started to emerge, Michael sat solitary outside the main lodge. His Java had turned tepid. A binder lay open on his knees, a battered field log he maintained more out of custom than duty. He gazed at the empty sheet for a long duration, before finally scripting a solitary phrase, "I violated the code." He tapped the quill against the page, then underscored the sentence once. He had always advocated non-interference, always instructed his apprentices. We exist to observe, not to alter. It was the prime directive of every bush guide, every preservationist, every wilderness scheme designed to encourage ethical wildlife tourism. He thought of the hundreds of nature coverage pamphlets, legal waivers, and conservation protocols he'd examined in his rookie years. None of them had equipped him for an occasion like today. There was no provision for exemptions driven by intuition. No text that stated, "In scarce instances, if a lioness blesses you with grace, proceed at your own moral discretion." And yet that was precisely what had transpired. He grasped his GoPro, which had captured nearly everything mounted unobtrusively on his vest. He transferred the recording to his computer and allowed it to run. There it was, the cub, the pack, the matriarch's advance, the forehead contact. He viewed it in hush. He viewed it again. It didn't make more sense the second time or the third, but it was authentic. The following dawn, he uploaded a brief segment to a private cloud drive, encrypted and archived. Not for social networks, not for the press, but for evidence for analysis for those who required visual proof to accept it. A few days later, he dispatched the footage to Dr. Anna Lenz, a German ethologist stationed in Windhoek, Namibia. They had collaborated on lion migration mapping years prior during Michael's ranger period. She was resilient, logical, and unshakably doubting. 2 days elapsed with no reply. Then came a voice message, her vocals trembling. "Michael, I've viewed it 4 times. I must witness that cub myself. I lack the vocabulary yet." He comprehended. Language was insufficient for this, but science required it nonetheless. By the week's end, Anna showed up at the camp accompanied by a pair of research assistants and a box of apparatus. She spoke little initially, opting instead to monitor from a distance. Every sunrise, she would survey the savannah with field glasses and high-definition optics, hunting for indications of the pride. Michael provided her with everything he recalled: the precise coordinates, wind vector, the cub's conduct, the lioness's demeanor. He depicted the instant when he believed he would perish, and the instant when he realized he would not. On the 4th dawn, they located the pride again, far off near a row of acacia trees under the soft mist of morning light. Anna drew a sharp breath when she spotted them. "It is she," she murmured. "That is the matriarch, the identical one from your video." They observed in silence as the pack maneuvered through the herbage. The youngster, still favoring its limbs, slightly trotted near the female, more robust, now even frolicsome. And then, to everyone's astonishment, it pivoted locked eyes with the transport and emitted a low, spirited peep. Anna looked at Michael. "That lionette recalls you." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. That night, under a lucid sky full of stars, Anna finally spoke openly. "What occurred out there, Michael? It defies all we believed we understood. The recognition, the restraint, the non-aggression. These actions aren't merely rare, they are unparalleled. If we possessed insurance for morality, we'd be filing claims for psychological shock." He smiled at her selection of phrasing. "And that cub," she continued, "may be the most critical unit of information I've ever witnessed." She paused, gazing out toward the distant dark. "I believe they knew what you were performing. I believe they comprehended. Michael nodded slowly. So do I. In the days that ensued, Anna commenced work on a research submission. Her scheme to launch an investigation into cross-species recognition patterns in wild lions, financed through a preservation scholarship, partnered with wildlife education networks, and eco-responsible travel sponsors. Michael consented to assist under one stipulation. No interference, he stated, unless a life is on the line. Anna smiled. Uttered like an individual who infringed his own law. He chuckled once. And I would do it again. Because some moments in life aren't about data. They're about decision. And sometimes the wilderness replies. A fortnight elapsed. The arid season entrenched itself further within the Kagalagati, turning the herbage into a fragile amber. The heavens remained void of clouds. The breeze gathered dust like reminiscence, dispersing it over the skyline. Michael had avoided that glade since the incident, not out of dread, but out of reverence. He understood the folly of testing the wild's decrees twice. What had transpired betwixt him and the pack was not something one revisited like a roadside attraction. It was not a miracle on request. It was a delicate, singular ritual, an unspeakable pact, forged in the fervor of instinct and hush. Yet on the 15th dawn, the pack sought him out. He was navigating a solitary, narrow track near the ancient baobab route, a path rarely utilized save for wardens inspecting lenses and solar-powered hydration units, financed by a sustainable wildlife tourism endowment. The rover crawled sluggishly, tires grinding over strewn gravel, and Michael was contemplating nothing specific when he spotted the initial form materialize through the vegetation. It was the matriarch. She halted mid-road, as if anticipating him. Michael braked gradually. One by one, the remainder ensued. The lionesses, the colossal male, and a rear figure limping marginally, yet more robust than prior. The cub. Michael's heart hammered once violently. They were not merely in transit. They were advancing. He killed the motor. The beasts drew nearer, yet without haste. It was measured intentional. The matriarch strode toward the vehicle. Her head dipped not in hostility but in recognition. Her orbs met his, then darted to the flank. And that was when he perceived they were constructing a lane. The troop divided half to the sinister side, half to the dexter, creating two slack files in the high grass. Between them lay a slender passage sufficient for a human to tread. It wasn't haphazard. It was a convoy. Michael's respiration hitched in his thorax. He alighted from the truck, typically every gesture calculated. His footwear struck the dust. The atmosphere was motionless. The lions remained positioned, vigilant yet serene. There was no snarling, no strain, merely anticipation. The cub padded ahead once more assured this time. It inhaled at his boots, then brushed its cranium briefly against his tibia, before pivoting and strolling down the aisle betwixt the lions. Michael pursued. He didn't interrogate it. He didn't dissect it. He simply walked. Every few paces, one of the felines would adjust slightly to sustain the corridor, resembling ceremonial guards aligning for a visiting noble. It was dreamlike, hallowed, the sort of instance one does not speak over. You simply exist within it and pray you recall it accurately. For almost 100 yards, they marched Michael in the core, flanked by living symbols of might and elegance. No lens could do it justice. No safari pamphlet, no nature documentary narration could encompass the gravity of what was unfolding. And then just as abruptly, they ceased. They had arrived at a broad opening where the turf dipped low and a ring of ancient timber shaded the earth. At the nucleus was the cub waiting. Michael paused. He gazed at the matriarch. She advanced again just once and then performed an act that anchored him to the location. She dipped her crown and tenderly grazed it against his limb. Just like previously, but this time lower, gentler, a valediction. The other lions ensued individually, each proffering a brief, nuanced signal. Some swept against his limb, others emitted short, breathy puffs near his flank. Even the massive male drew near. His amber optics locked with Michael's for a protracted second. Then he leaned in, not belligerently, but intentionally, and pressed his heavy brow against Michael's shoulder. A token of esteem. Michael did not stir. He wished not to fracture the enchantment. The youngster was the final to approach. It stood before him, tail twitching, then sat in the grit. Its eyes peered upward, inquisitive, cognizant, almost entertained. It emitted a diminutive, prolonged audio somewhere betwixt a chirp and a rumble. Michael grinned. "I realize," he murmured. "I scarcely credit it myself." And then the cub executed something phenomenal. It extended one paw and tapped Michael's boot exquisitely, resembling an infant grasping for a guardian's palm. Then it rotated and trekked back to its clan. That was the conclusion. They did not glance back. They had no need to. They had escorted him here, marched with him, contacted him, and restored their offspring to his world and theirs. And now the portal had silently shut behind them. Michael remained in the opening for a lengthy duration after the pride vanished into the tall herbage. He did not weep. Not yet. Instead, he retrieved his mobile not for reception, but to register a voice note, as he frequently did on extended travels. This time his vocals trembled slightly as he spoke. "Something transpired today, something I suspect no one will ever credit even with video. A lion pride constructed a route and escorted me through it like I was one of their kin. It wasn't about supremacy. It wasn't inquisitiveness. It was something distinct. Something akin to thankfulness. Something akin to faith." He paused. "I believe I was granted an opportunity to bid adieu." Returned to the vehicle, seated at the controls, his dashcam, which he had left recording, flashed to verify it had documented the entire event. The video would evolve into one of the most discussed segments on Nature Board's documentary groups, and even a feature on a major residential and vitality coverage firm's site, debating the hidden factors of wilderness exposure during eco-trips. Yet for Michael, the genuine recollection would never be electronic. It would forever be the audio of soft treads in parched herbage and a cub once fractured, now mended, departing on its own. By the moment the news escaped, it was already too vast to suppress. Michael hadn't uploaded anything personally. He never intended to. The recordings from his dashboard unit, the vest-attached GoPro, and Anna's telephoto captures had all been archived for analysis, not for the public to stare at. However, one of Anna's trainees, youthful visionary, and utterly swept away by what he had beheld, had discreetly distributed a grainy snippet to a private conservationist board. That is where it commenced. From there, it dispersed like an uncontrolled flame. By the week's conclusion, the tale was on wildlife logs and safari tour bulletins. A renowned documentary network approached Anna's squad, soliciting sole privileges. Someone assembled a slow-motion edit of Michael's trek through the lion convoy, accompanied by tender piano melodies and a narration citing Rudyard Kipling. And then arrived the captions. "Felines establish ceremonial rank for human who rescued their offspring. Excursion leader secures unexampled entry to feral pack. The lion whisperer of Kagalagati." Michael detested that one. He was no whisperer. He wasn't mystical. He was a human who had formed a resolution he could neither elucidate nor lament. At the settlement, matters shifted nearly instantaneously. Travelers, primarily pensioners, educators, technicians, and proprietors from across the states, started demanding his party exclusively. They didn't merely desire to view lions. They desired to view those lions. The pride was still out there, still untamed, still remaining isolated, yet they were no longer wary of Michael's transport. On 3 distinct mornings, they had ventured within visual range of his expeditions, tranquil, unhurried, as if they identified the aroma and sanctioned his riders. One afternoon, an elder gentleman named Jack, a former Air Force grease monkey from Minnesota, leaned over in the Rover and murmured, "I've witnessed much in my existence, but if that beast glances at you and signals I might just accept there's something grander occurring here." Michael grinned. "I am not certain I credit it myself." Jack laughed. "Immaterial, I beheld it regardless." The moniker arrived soon after, sibling of the beasts. It originated with a scout from another lodge half-jesting on the transmitter. "You spot Mike yet? He's strolling with his kin again." The Maasai trackers adopted it next. They dubbed him Ndugu wa Simba, brother of the lions, a title grounded in both wit and esteem. But what signified more than the label was what accompanied it. Tour agencies began altering their promotional emphasis. Eco-travel bureaus updated their protection summaries, inserting new stress on erratic cross-species engagements. Wildlife trusts reached out suggesting lecture circuits and envoy positions. And for the initial time in his existence, Michael Carter felt uneasily conspicuous. He didn't crave fame. He just wished to honor what had transpired. So when Anna summoned him to co-write the inaugural scholarly paper regarding the incident under the heading Recognition and Restraint, a case study in cross-species social response, among Panthera leo, he consented, but with stipulations: no embellishment, no hypotheses regarding beastly ESP, no assertions of paranormal distinctness. Just the data, he told her, and the sensation if they allow us to insert it. The paper went live 3 months later in a distinguished behavioral science periodical. A week following that, National Geographic approached them for a highlight. And throughout it all, Michael continued laboring. He led expeditions. He instructed rookie wardens. He orated at neighborhood assemblies and regional academies regarding preservation, reverence, and the boundaries of what we assume we comprehend. But every few weeks, when he possessed a spare morning, he would drive out solitary. No patrons, no lenses, just him, his kit bag, and a silent flask of Java. He would station near the bluff place, his boots on the heated soil, and anticipate. He never went searching for the pack. He simply waited. Occasionally they arrived. Occasionally they didn't. But when they did, it was never for a performance. They would materialize at a span. Matriarch offspring, females male. No clamor, no theatrics, just existence. The sort that made one feel diminutive in the finest manner possible. On one specific dawn, as he sat beneath an acacia nursing tepid coffee, the cub, now nearly mature, emerged alone. No pride, no audio. It strode to within 20 feet, then seated itself. Michael nodded once. The young beast blinked sluggishly, and then, to his absolute incredulity, it rose, paced forward, and reclined beside him. Not near enough for contact yet, near enough to split the same shadow. They sat like that for nearly half an hour, man and lion, observing the breeze alter across the savannah. No utterances, no signals, just serenity. Michael never divulged that morning to anyone. He didn't document it, didn't snap a photo. It didn't pertain to a research abstract or a tourism brochure. It belonged right there betwixt the two of them. That night, as he scribed in his log, he halted midway through a phrase. He gazed out at the constellations, lucid and distinct above the arid dark, and he grinned because he comprehended. Now you don't acquire moments like that because you merited them. You receive them because you were present, because you acted. And occasionally the wild recalls. Almost 3 months had elapsed since that forenoon, beneath the thorn tree, the occasion, where the subadult male had opted to share his shadow with Michael. No bellows, no cautions, simply existence. That date had signified something for Michael, something he didn't entirely comprehend, yet he bore with hushed thankfulness. Existence had resumed its rhythm. The cycle was shifting anew. Chilly evenings swept in, rustling through the arid foliage, agitating loose bark and murmurs from the soil. The lodge stayed occupied with voyagers, primarily senior pairs, ex-service members, pensioned caregivers, educators, and bookkeepers searching for one final souvenir to transport homeward. They arrived anticipating pachyderms, rhinos, the evasive cheetah, and progressively they arrived inquiring regarding the felines. Michael never pledged them anything. "This is no menagerie," he would remark with a grin. "This is their domain. We are the ones requiring leave." Yet they aspired. And occasionally, just sufficiently often, the pack would materialize at a span. The sightseers would inhale sharply. Lenses would ascend, but Michael's optics always located the cub initially, not a cub any longer. Robust, composed, still marching with a marginal preference for the left rear limb, a petite blemish from the day it encountered a human who violated the code. One late day, Michael obtained a signal via transmitter from one of the wardens on beat. "Mike, you ought to witness this. Southern path, low curve by the parched brook." He proceeded solitary. By the time he attained the spot, the sun was sinking, flinging elongated amber silhouettes through the herbage. And there they resided, the pack lounging in a wide ring near the boulders. The matriarch rose, yet this time matters differed. The juvenile male, Michael's lion, as some softly dubbed it, stood alongside her taller, now self-assured yet watchful. He advanced, abandoning the troop. Michael remained motionless, just a few yards distant. His palm grazed the flank of the Land Rover, anchoring himself. The beast approached gradually, intentionally. There was no dread, no wavering. And then, for the second occasion in his existence, Michael underwent something that contradicted everything he assumed he understood. The beast halted merely feet distant. He gazed at him for a protracted, mute instant. Then, in a solitary gesture, he sat. Not hostile, not inquisitive, attentive. Michael did not utter a word. He did not stir. The beast leaned ahead tenderly, pressing his cranium not to his palm, not to his torso, but to his brow, precisely as the matriarch had performed a signal of valediction. It wasn't obedience. It wasn't imitation. It was validation. Subsequently, he rose anew, pivoted, and strode back toward the clan. But ere vanishing into the high reeds, he paused once more, partially rotated, and emitted a brief, hushed note, a vocalization somewhere betwixt a summons and a suspiration. Michael realized this wasn't another gathering. This was the conclusion, the ultimate section of their mutual strand, knotted together in the bush, where no phrases had ever been uttered, and none required to be. He remained there long after the felines had evaporated. The illumination faded. The heavens transitioned to slate azure. He ascended back into his rover and sat motionless, not engaging the ignition. He groped for the petite dictaphone he stored in the console, depressed the capture button. "This shall likely be the concluding log," he stated gently. "Today the male approached me solo. No pack. He grazed my forehead just once, identical to how his dam did that day in the river channel, and then he departed. A hiatus. He is no longer a nursing cub. He requires me not, and that is how it is intended to be." He ceased the taping there. That dusk, as he rested by the blaze outside his chalet, Anna accompanied him. She uttered nothing initially, merely decanted Java into two metal vessels. They sat adjacent, allowing the night to expand around them. Finally, she queried, "So that is the end?" Michael agreed. "I believe that was his adieu." Anna peered into the embers. "Peculiar. For a breed that doesn't articulate our dialect, they certainly understand how to convey something." He grinned. "They always grasped more than we attributed to them." Anna sipped her drink, then glanced obliquely. "Do you intend to narrate the tale?" Michael shook his head. "I already did, merely not with words." The settlement turned hushed. Past the boundary, nocturnal noises woke scavengers in the distance, a raptor, the gale sweeping across withered fronds. Michael reclined in his seat, the heat of the fire caressing his visage. He required no viral clip. He required no cinema contract, or another piece in a top-tier indemnity and voyage periodical captioned, "When the Wild Salutes You." He simply required the recollection. And in a sphere where so much is hurried, transmitted, and narrated for approval and views, Michael possessed something superior. He possessed an instant that pertained solely to him and a lion. Should this narrative have stirred you even marginally, please deposit a simple 1 in the feedback section to signify your attendance, or key in 0 if you remain without words, as was the case for numerous among us. We review every remark, and your expressions hold genuine value. Furthermore, if you wish to continue journeying alongside us through tales such as this, authentic accounts of bravery, bonds, and the wilderness, remember to click that subscribe icon. Additional indelible instances are approaching shortly. Let us persist in exploring them as a team.